Hi, I'm Joan Middendorf, and I'm going to show you today how to check student performance using Step 6 of Decoding the Disciplines. We'll look at some examples of techniques for you to apply to your bottlenecks or to your team's bottlenecks. At Step 6 assessment, we want to check student performance on the specific mental action that students would use to get through the bottleneck that you decoded earlier. Let's look at a typical assessment in a course. This one was at the end of the course. Students had to write a final essay, and here are all the things they had to do it well. These grading assessments can be compared to blood pressure or heart rate as measures of a person's overall wellness. We get an overall sense of how well students performed in the course. But how can we check if students mastered a particular skill? With decoding, we teach to the component skills, the separate bottlenecks, before we bring them all back together in some synthetic assignment like this end of course essay. So let's contrast the two forms of assessment. Assessments for grading, they're global. Gregor Novak says they're like an autopsy because they occur after the unit of instruction, too late to help the patient. They give a holistic sense of proficiency. Sometimes we need a deeper, more targeted look. So along the way, as we build up the skills for that global graded assessment, we want to do these learning assessments that we like to call CATs, classroom assessment techniques. These are like a Fitbit by which people track specific small measures of personal health, you know, your exercise and activity levels, your food, weight, sleep patterns. Like Fitbits for teaching, CATs provide feedback to students and teachers on the health of specific competencies in a course. You might want to stop the video at this point to jot down your bottleneck, the mental action, your analogy, because in a minute you're going to be looking at several examples of CATs to check on the mental action, the specific critical reasoning you want the students to do. So you're going to be shopping for CATs. I'm going to show some examples of assessment techniques so you can pick one to finalize your bottleneck lesson plan or to give to your teammates. So stop the video now if you want to write these down. Often the most useful CATs are very different from the graded assessments we use in our class. So if graded assessments are essays, for example, then the CATs that we're going to pick as a difference from that will be kinesthetic or visual. Or if students perform calculations or write programs in your class, then some kind of really prosy written CAT might give us a different way to gauge students' proficiency on skills. So here are these three broad kinds of CATs. There's kinesthetic, written, and visual. And so let's start with some kinesthetic CATs. Kinesthetics are physical or whole body CATs. And the first one I want to show you is stand-up, sit-down CATs. And these check, you could use this, if you were in a class I was taking, we could check student understanding on a question, make a question that has two answers. If you were in a session with me, say on second language learners, I'd say everyone stand up. Sit down if you think your students struggle more with communication, with vocabulary and comprehension, but remain standing if you think the difficulty is more conceptual. They can't understand the concepts. And then I'd ask some of the people who were sitting why they chose to sit. Why do they think the difficulty is conceptual? I'd ask some of the people who are standing why they think it's more a communication problem. You can use this CAT, this stand-up, sit-down CAT, for example, when your class is low on energy. Here's another kinesthetic CAT. You can ask your students to place themselves along two ends of a continuum. For example, place yourself on a number line to indicate if most of your students prefer, at the low end, information transfer versus at the high end, deep learning. Because kinesthetic CATs involve the whole body, they're especially memorable. So a teacher might assess kinesthetically for particularly important mental actions. So now we're going to go to some of the written CATs. So one is word journal. A word journal is cat number 14 from the Angelo and Cross book. Summarize a class session or the text in one word. Write a paragraph explaining why did you choose that word. So when students have to explain the word choice, this encourages metacognition, or thinking about their own thinking, which is higher level thinking. And we found also word journal often captures an affective reaction, which can be useful to us. So the next written cat is categorizing grid. And in a computing class about programming, you'd use this cat. You'd have the students choose the correct category. Is this category, are they going to use an array or a struct for each of these kinds of data, rainfall data, address book data? And the teacher and students can see if they're putting things in the appropriate category. So now we're going to go to the last category of cats on our quick run through cats today, visual cats. Visual cats give us a different way of seeing what is in the student's mind's eye. Also, I want to say that in these next few examples, I'm going to show you a few ways to analyze your learning assessment data. Remember, we're not trying to catch students out, but without this feedback loop in the learning, we may not know for sure what students have gleaned from the class, and the students may not know either until it's too late. So a visual assessment, this visual assessment was given in a history class taught by Leah Shopko, a class on medieval heroes. And so she told the students to draw what Beowulf looks like to the audience for the poem and use passages from the poem as evidence in your picture. So they were going to actually give a line from the poem. So you'll see numbers of the line from the poem as the evidence. And she drew her drawing of Hrothgar. So what we found when the students did this is that plot and the physical really drew most of their focus. And those are the most visual things, but they're also very general, shared by many heroes in many periods, and tell us less about the Anglo-Saxon audience and how they experienced Beowulf in the poem. So students on average did come up with 12 pieces of evidence, which is interesting to see. They were less concerned with role, which is really crucial in different times because we expect quite specific, unique things. People in different times expect different things of their heroes. And character wasn't listed very much, although a good character and what that means differs. It's very socially specific. So let's go on to the concept cat. And this is from Professor Katie Pilichowski's astronomy course. She asked, what are the processes at work in the creating of a Milky Way? And after she had the students write that, she sorted them and analyzed them, and she graphed the results. And she saw that there were some things that they were good at the beginning, some things they improved on during her lesson, and some things like the sun that they still were going to need to work on when she was done. So she could really see what they were getting and what they needed to work on more about the Milky Way. Let's look at one last assessment here. This is from a class on the history of competition and collaboration taught by Professor David Pace. Remember, the key on these assessments is to have the assessment aim right at the bottleneck. In this case, the bottleneck was the students found it difficult to uncover values that are implicit in these primary sources. They have to read between the lines. People don't just say, these are my values. So they have to find them. So they read a Victorian text where people were championing competition, and then they had to read people who didn't like competition. They did that in the 4th week and show exactly where in the text they found that. And they did this again at the 15th week. And in fact, this enabled us to use these homework assignments as pre and post tests. Another thing we find very valuable in assessing student learning, assessing the very small particular component skill. And on this pre and post test, he found that their score went from a 2.3 to a 3.5, about a 34% increase from being able to just repeat literally what the text had said to presenting the assumptions implicit in the text. So we get a lot of insights when we pre and post test, whether we're doing it at the beginning of the lesson or an end of a lesson, or the beginning and end of a course. To summarize step 6 of assessment, the point with step 6 is to check performance of a specific mental action or bottleneck before students are tested and graded, and to make sure students have sufficient mastery of a component mental action before an instructor builds on that skill. We've seen a range of some of the CATs we've found most effective. Familiarity with at least a few CATs provides several different ways to measure student performance and is an important tool for classroom teachers. And so is pre and post testing, using more than one technique in case one of them doesn't work so well, or to find one that works well for you. So if you're working with me, then what's next? Think about a couple of CATs that you might use that are different from the graded assessments in your class, or some that might be good for the people on your team, or use one to collect an assessment, because we're going to use it at our next session. So collect an assessment. Pick a CAT and collect the data. Bring it to our session. If you'd like more information, you can go to our website or look for our forthcoming book, Decoding the Disciplines, Helping Students Learn Critical Thinking, and happy decoding.